An audit of state veteran centers tells us what we already knew. And is anybody concerned about the timing of this audit? Plus, a new education battle is looming in the fall. And medical marijuana, from the state health department to the legislature, the story that just keeps on giving. Coming up on the News9 sessions with Grant Herms, but without Aaron Brailback this week. That's next, the News9 sessions on Mitchell Talks.
You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.
Mr. Herms, welcome to this episode. I think that you did a story this week. Let me start this one off because this one's puzzling me. And we're going to get to medical marijuana and the AG debate and so many things that are going on. But the Auditor and Inspector's Office puts out an audit about the Department of Veteran Affairs. And I've got some questions about it. But you did the story. Explain to listeners what this audit is all about.
Basically, this audit looked at the Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs, which is the state department of this. It's in conjunction with the federal Department of Veterans Affairs, and showed really, really bad workplace condition. They called it toxic. They said it was hostile. One employee said that the whole place was run on secrets, lies, and deceit. It definitely impacted patient care, per this audit, per what employees were saying. Some employees think that it actually increased the number of deaths because this place was so poorly run. It had really high turnover and attrition rates. It does not look good for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And in the story I did this week, also, this kind of stuff echoes what was happening at the Departments of Health and Tourism. And in those places, we saw after this some serious troubles in the financial departments of those departments. So I haven't seen anything else about that coming out yet, but just what's happening in the personnel side of this department is troubling, especially in a department that's meant to help people who've served our country.
All right, let me quote Yogi Berra. It's deja vu all over again. In the early part, 6 years ago, Alex Cameron, Scott Carter, Bob Sands were doing stories about the Department of Veterans Affairs. That's 2012. Then we have a succession of people working on this issue, different people that have been in and out of there. So here's what I'm troubled about. Number one, the audit that the Auditor Inspector's Office put out started, as I recall from your story, in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now there's number one. Number two, we're 3 weeks away from a runoff campaign in which the auditor and inspectors on the GOP side, the handpicked person of the auditor inspector is in a runoff.
Which is who? You should say that for
Cindy Byrd against Charles Prater. And I guess the third thing that bothers me is there's still a problem over there. So I was going back to, I was reviewing some of the stories about health department. There are people who have said, and there was a hearing, which I don't know what happened to those hearings, okay, that the House was holding, that the Auditor Inspector's Office knew in July of last year there was a problem in the health department. And then we don't know anything until September. He recuses himself from the investigation back in December, and people are starting to say, at that time, there were allegations that the Auditor Inspector's Office was more incompetent than the State Department of Health's Finance Department. And all of this comes out just 3 weeks before a campaign. I'm just telling you, there's so many troubling things about this, I can't even begin to talk about it.
I think we're looking at the intersection of a few things. The thing that I think you're alluding to is that Gary Jones isn't dumb. He's also a political player here. And so of course, you time these audit releases to around these elections. I mean, they'll say that they don't, but it's a thought process. Right. It's part of it, whether it's their sole goal. So especially when it's their sole goal, to say that, I don't know if that's true or not, but he's no dummy. I think another part of it here is just how long audits take, how forthcoming people are, their ability to not want to jump to conclusions. I think Jones is adamant and truthful about those things. We have no idea what was going on at the federal level to get some of those numbers back. We had a whole, administration changeover. There were problems at the VA at the federal level that were happening. But yes, the timing here is, I'm not suspicious. I wouldn't go that far to say that, but I would say it's convenient.
For people that have been around the block a little bit, we look at this and go, oh, yeah, sure. When something that people like Cameron and Sands and Carter had been saying 6 years ago, the whole thing. Perhaps this is an indication that we're going to have to, in the media, spend a little more time talking about these down ballot races. There has not been a serious discussion of the competency of the state auditor and inspector's office. We've had all of this stuff last year at the legislature. Got to do these audits. Well, that depends on who's doing your audits. Jones has always blamed the legislature for every fault that comes along. And we haven't had discussions about the competency of the staff, what was going on over there at the State Department of Health with the auditor and inspector's office, what they were looking at. You know that there was the Dorflinger versus Jones feud. But it's like when the teacher walkout happened, everybody in media just forgot about it. And there's only 3 weeks left to have a discussion. And this really is an important race because Cindy Byrd is the continuation of the Jones administration.
Especially at a time when you have a lot, mostly on the right, but partly across the political spectrum, of people wanting to audit every agency, have a full statewide audit, which they already do. There's a comprehensive audit, but if they want an investigative audit of every agency, that's a big sticking point for a lot of Republicans right now. And so to not pay as much attention to the office doing those audits, it's probably a misstep and a miscalculation on somebody's part here in the parties to not make this a bigger piece of this runoff and the midterms.
There's more races than there are journalists. So,
that's also true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. There are more races than I can keep my eyes on, and you got to pick and choose which ones are the most important or the most consequential. And maybe we have dropped the ball on this a little bit by not covering this auditor's race.
Well, you haven't. You're doing the story.
We're doing the story, but broadly speaking, across media, not just us, but I think we've picked and chosen the shiny objects so far. And that might change when we get past the runoffs here. I don't know.
Speaking of shiny objects, News9 and News on 6 did the AG debate in Tulsa the other day. I got to do the preview on that and saw that fabulous News on 6 building. Holy moly.
It's gorgeous, right?
Oh, it's unbelievable. It makes Fox News and CBS and all this stuff probably can't compare to that. But this one it looked to be tamer than the one that Trey Savage and Non-Dock Tower Theater put on. How do you see this race shaping up now that that's behind them? That's probably it in terms of mass media.
I think that's it in terms of this widespread. I think that's it in terms of this widespread, visuality, if I'm going to make up a word here, for the voters. It's an interesting race. I thought that night was very Nixon-Kennedy-esque. I don't think Hunter on TV presented himself very well. I think he lost the beginning half of that debate. Drummond was really strong and was at his best that night as the outsider, being able to poke holes in Hunter's record, being able to ask questions of Hunter without actually getting answers from him. Hunter did a lot better in the middle portion of the debate. He was able to explain how the Office of the Attorney General works, what he's doing right now with legislature and with other departments in the government, that Drummond just can't and doesn't have the knowledge of because he's not the Attorney General. So I think Hunter was strong in those points. That part aside, going back to the looks of it, Drummond got a haircut beforehand. He actually had some makeup on. He had a sharply tailored suit on, knew how to sit on camera. Hunter, not so much. His jacket was open the entire time. I don't think he had much makeup on, if he had any on. So looked a little out of place. Also had this look that he was kind of annoyed to have to be there a little bit, which might just be him. And that's not like a super terrible knock against him. It just was something that I noticed that I think people who are watching also noticed.
In the preview that we did, Drummond was there, Gettner Drummond, and he was sharp and he was ready, and it's like he was ready to take the field. Okay, it was like he was ready to run out the tunnel. I mean, he was amped. Okay. And Attorney General Hunter, he's more laid back. He's kind of, hey. And some of the questions I ask him takes 3 or 4 seconds to answer. He's a careful guy, but he's kind of Cali cool too.
Little bit.
And so I don't know how that translates on television because obviously for you, Mr. Drummond is more intense and Mr. Hunter's laid back. That's just their personalities, and that they were that evening. So,
and I think the Cali Cool thing works better in person in a live room. On TV, it sometimes comes off as aloof, which is not always bad. I mean, he is the guy in the office already, so he can carry that some of that to the debate as it is. But if we're going to stick with football analogies, I think Drummond fumbled in the middle of that debate and near the end of the debate when he wasn't able to really explain how he would do the job and didn't have anything to hit Hunter back with. He was at his best when he was pushing back against Hunter and not really presenting himself.
On the degree of negativity, the first one was really heated, okay? Do you think they might have throttled back a little bit just because of how the first debate, the non-doc debate, was viewed?
I think so. I think a little bit of that because voters have been so off-put by how dirty this race has been, just how ugly it's been between these two candidates. So I think they did pull back a little bit. We also didn't ask those questions. We didn't let them free range at that as much. We let them kind of have their back and forth, and then our moderators were fantastic that night, really clamped down. It didn't give them the chance to rebut, didn't give them the ability to go over their time or talk over one another. It was very clear that they were not going to be allowed to do that.
And that was brought to the Oklahoma public by the only locally owned television broadcast company. That's the difference, because the ones out of state, I mean, who cares, right?
Right.
Medical marijuana. Lots of activity the last couple of weeks going in a different direction. Your viewpoint of where the story's headed and what has been done, what needs to be done?
I think there are a few avenues that we're going to have to watch as we go forward. Obviously, we're closing in. We're in the month now where they're going to start taking in applications. Will the Department of Health, will the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, which is under the Department of Health, that's the new agency that they've created for medical marijuana, will they be ready in time to start accepting these applications? I think another avenue is will doctors be on board with this? There are now starting to be stories and murmurs of doctors who won't give this to their patients if they ask for it. And so, will the Department of Health provide a list of doctors who are willing to try this new treatment? How will patients find those people? Will they be able to afford it? Insurance is also a part of that, because in most cases, it will not be covered by your insurance. Also, the other avenue here, the legislative working group, and what's going to happen with the ideas coming out of that. Are they going to create a whole new commission to deal with medical marijuana because it's such a big issue? And then at that point in time, we hit the midterms, and that could be a whole new ball of wax afterwards, because we don't know who's going to be in office, who might be a part of that commission or not commission. But they have until September of next year to put in the permanent rules that could change everything in 788. Just the Board of Health right now only has to follow 788. The legislature does not. So there's a lot of things that this can go down in the next 6 months, and it could all get blown up in the middle by the midterms. We just have no idea.
Is the heat off the health department now and back on the legislature?
I think so. I think the heat, now that the Board of Health has course corrected in the middle here, I think we're still going to have some stuff with the former general counsel, Julia Zell. As that continues to come out, that investigation will probably be out in the coming weeks. What they find in that investigation, I should say. So I think that'll pop up again, but I think the Department of Health and the Board of Health is in the clear from broad public ire at this point. Now, they're still being sued. There are people who are unhappy with these rule revisions, even though they went back on the controversial rules they did beforehand. So those lawsuits are still in there, and that'll be a continuing story. But I think for the most part, we're now looking ahead to seeing what the legislature does, what the governor and new governor are going to do. I think that's where this is going to head.
The big question then becomes, will the crowd that showed up in the primary, they were suitably agitated 3 weeks ago, are they going to be chilled out? Are they coming back during the runoffs in the general, in your opinion?
I think so. And I think so actually for the next thing we're going to talk about, which is State Question 801. But I think the staggered deadlines of medical marijuana here, so we have this deadline this past week for just getting the applications up online, and they start accepting at the end of this month, August 25th. I think that's going to keep this in the front of people's minds. And if that gets bungled when they start accepting applications, if that gets botched, then it's a problem. Then we're going to see those same voters turn out. But I mean, if you're done here, I'll move on to the next thing, because that State Question 801, which changes if it gets passed, would change how school districts get to use their property taxes, their ad valorem taxes. They could use them to pay teachers as well, which OEA has come out against. I was just talking with OEA this week about a whole host of midterm education issues, and education has kind of taken a back seat since medical marijuana passed. This is going to put that back in play, and the same voters who turn out for education problems are the same voters, more or less, that turn out for medical marijuana voting. What are your thoughts about what the governor did here? Her putting this on this November ballot seems like an antithesis to what she would actually want to do, which was not bring out Democratic voters.
Perhaps she thinks this what works the base up, and they can say we've done something. We're going to cover it on Sunday on Your Vote Counts. We'll ask the leader, and we'll ask Representative Dunnington. They did I think that in retrospect, what the GOP did on medical marijuana was the right move. They put that in the primary. They were calculating that those people that will show up to vote for medical marijuana won't be there in November, and they better be right. Because if they show up again in November, but that's what they did. And I think this is one of those issues where you can say, well, we're getting more money for education. So I think there was a clear political calculation on this. How it's going to work, I don't know. It worked out good for them. And if you're a GOP, it worked out good for them in the primary.
True. It did work for them in the primary.
Today, we'll see how it works in November. But everything has to be viewed, just like we started off. Everything has to be viewed through the prism of the election. It's like this audit. Put it out 2 days after the election. Well, why would you do that when you could influence? I mean, all I can think about is Jim Comey type stuff going on here, right? So I would just say to listeners, and our listeners are not stupid. They see what's going on here. A lot of this is all calculation. Everything since the 1st of February has been viewed by me and you and everybody else that watches us closely through the prism of the 2018 general election.
So is this a question of a final gift from the governor to her own party here? Because generally, education is a Democratic issue, and Democrats turn out for that. And if OEA launches a real campaign, which they're going to be doing anyway as we get closer to the midterms, if they launch a real campaign against State Question 801, I mean, we're going to see probably some extra turnout that we wouldn't see normally in a midterm.
Well, I will tell you, in my opinion, what happens here is the governor's office has thrown OEA a life preserver because they were catching lots of heat since the walkout. Now they've got a reason to rally troops again. So once again, it's funny, it's strange bedfellows there. You've got the governor's office, OEA, who probably couldn't agree on what to order for dinner, but at the same time, they have found a reason to coexist and to fight another day. So. And it's going to take a ton of messaging. This is very out in the weeds. It's very esoteric. I've already seen when you go to Oklahoma Ed and look at the discussion groups on Twitter, this is very weedy stuff. No reference to the medical marijuana thing. It's just very nerd stuff. So I already had a couple of folks that have contacted me. We'll be doing hot seats on this deal. And I've just told a lot of these folks, I said, let's get the primary or the runoff done before we start talking about this. But this is going to galvanize education. So the calculation of what it does in November, everybody better make sure that their compass is true north on what they're doing.
Definitely. And my other thought here, and this is also a little weedy, so hang with me, is this the beginning of really pushing for a broader set of charter schools in Oklahoma? Do you start telling districts they can take their ad valorem taxes, their property taxes, and giving them to schools? And is it just the first pavement stone in this path to really privatizing a lot of the school systems in Oklahoma? Or do you think this is just like a one-off thing to bring everybody back together? Because it's not that far of a logical leap to get to this ad valorem tax is going, to your districts. Well, why don't we just give it back to you? Let's start building charter schools. Then you can take that money out of your education account that you get back from these new taxes and give it to pay teachers in this new charter school you like better. I don't know if that's actually the thinking here. I think if you ask people at OCPA, that might be a good idea for, in their eyes. But I don't know. Do you think that that's getting too far ahead?
I think of the 19% of people that think the governor is doing a good job, which is the lowest number in the nation, 19%. That's below the Mendoza line in baseball. 18% of those people are charter school folks and school choice people.
Right.
The school choice people have, effectively at the legislature, they've been very incompetent. They got a ton of money, horrible messaging, and Mary Fallin has been their hero. And you may be exactly right. This may be moving towards that scenario, but they're going to be very supportive of their governor on this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Mr. Herms.
You bet. Have a great day.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter @MitchellTalks.